Marc Raimondi for MMAfighting.com in New York with Chuck Mindenhall just a few hours from now. Behind those doors at Madison Square Garden, UFC 230 will take place, and we are here to preview that for MMAfighting.com. Chuck, when the main event of this card between UFC heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier and Derrick Lewis, the challenger, was made, it's only about 3 weeks ago.
Right.
And it was kind of made with a collective raise of the eyebrow, so to speak, a kind of a shrug, like we didn't expect that fight to be the next one really for either man, especially since Derrick Lewis said, I'm not ready for a title shot yet. Now that we're here, now that we're at Madison Square Garden, we're in New York, we've been through fight week, DC Lewis fight week. Is this a real, does it feel like a real fight now? Is it gone from surreal to reality?
Well, I'll tell you what, just watching them tonight as they faced off, for the first time there was no kind of camaraderie between those guys. They finally were looking at each other with a little bit of like menace, and it was a pretty intense stare down, and they did not shake hands or nothing like that. I don't know if that was prearranged, but that gave me a little bit of a sense of like, okay, now they're in business mode, now they want to go out there and do each other harm. And I think that you go to these weigh-ins and that's kind of what you want. It's the ceremonial weigh-ins. It's ceremonial in terms of we already know what their weight is, but I think this is when it tells us if these guys are going to get intense or not. So I was pretty pleased with that, and I think money in this situation, the money talks, it kind of revs them up and puts them in the right frame of mind in the end. They both got a lot to lose and a lot to gain, so I think now that it's sunken into that level, I feel like we're there.
The rivalry, and I say that tongue firmly planted in cheek, rivalry between these two men started in July when they were up on the dais of a UFC 226 pre-fight press conference, and they were kind of getting into a little bit of verbal fun, and our former colleague Ari Hawani asked, Derrick, what's your problem with DC? And Derrick Lewis said he was disrespecting Popeye's chicken from that parody video a few years ago. So the feud, so to speak, kind of started on a joke. And it's been kind of through the Derrick Lewis hot balls and DC being DC, it's kind of been funny throughout, but it did get serious tonight a little bit at the weigh-ins. Do you see a different side of this fight now that we've seen that, or is it still kind of like, all right, we know that this is kind of almost much more fun than say a Conor versus Khabib?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to rival that, what was going on in that fight. It was like Dana White said, dark. That almost didn't even seem to cover how dark it really was. This one, there's still levity at the core, and obviously they're kind of these fast food wars that have come into it. They're using these guys as a little bit as pawns, I guess, in this grander scheme. It's just fun, but I do think that in the promo video they showed tonight, Derrick Lewis is like, I'll hit anybody as long as I'm getting paid. And I feel like that's a little bit of a mercenary attitude, but that's kind of like what Derrick Lewis is. He's kind of the hitman that comes in to go do his job. He told me straight up, I'm sure he's mentioned this a million times, like he's not really interested in being the best fighter in the world, I mean, that's just a unique stance to take. He's not sugarcoating that. I think he gets the chance to knock your head off, that's what he's going to do. And from what I saw here tonight, that was the first look I saw from him was like, he's seeing a target now. He's not just seeing one of the guys he's playing around with. He's starting to see the target, and I think that's what that made it. That translated, I thought, in the theater today.
For Daniel Cormier, I guess people are saying that there's much more for him to lose in a sense, because he has that Brock Lesnar payday staring him in the face if he can get by Derrick Lewis. Didn't have to do this fight. He could have waited. He could have rested on his laurels, waited for Brock Lesnar to become eligible from his USADA suspension, and made a ton of money early next year. Instead, he's kind of rolling the dice. But is there something to gain for Cormier in this fight, do you think, outside of just that another payday?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that's gaining, obviously, with the pay-per-view points and everything else. If you take the money aside and the obvious, you take, you know how the fight game is. Almost, we talked about this a little earlier. Almost nothing goes the way it's planned. There's always some contingency plan, and there's usually some kind of plan that goes off of that because that didn't work out. So I think that he's looking at it like, this is a sure thing. He gets a legacy-defining fight at Madison Square Garden. He knows he might have only 2 fights left. He may be playing with that idea a little bit, but right now it looks like there's 2 fights left. The Lesnar fight is still there. I think that he's a very sensible person who looked at the matchup and he thought, I think I can get through this fight, and I think I can do it. Now, I also think
a bit of a gamble.
It's still a gamble, and I think he probably has some kind of contingency plan. He mentioned to media that basically, if he loses, there's going to be a new conversation about him getting that crack at the light heavyweight title. And then the Brock Lesnar fight is not necessarily compromised if he loses. It depends on how this all goes. But I think that having Brock Lesnar come back and fight him for the title obviously raises that to the umpteenth degree. But he could still fight Brock Lesnar. It just wouldn't have the magnitude of the belt.
Right.
Yeah.
Cormier weighed 251.3 think it was 4 pounds on Friday morning. Has the ship sailed for him going back down to 205?
That was my first thought.
Yeah,
that was my first thought. You see him, and we were talking a little bit about this. Like, he's just thick everywhere. Like, he's a
Yes.
guy. He's
thick with
carrying
2
weight.
C's, Chuck.
Yeah,
thick with 2
yes.
C's.
He's carrying a lot of weight, and you see him when he's like this. It looks kind of like he's in his full frame, and you think, how does he ever get down to 205?
Yeah.
It makes you kind of forget that he cuts all that weight. He's professional. He's been doing it for so long with wrestling and everything. He doesn't complain about it, as he's going through it. But I think that you see him like this, and how old is he? He's going to be 40 years old.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to have to be killing himself if he doesn't have to. But having said all that, he keeps pointing out that if he fights John Jones again down the line, whenever that'll occur, that he would want to fight him at light heavyweight. So at this point, you have to take him at his word. But seeing him like this, I'm skeptical.
And we did see John Jones first press conference back from his suspension today, and he doesn't seem to want to fight Daniel Cormier really at all. Definitely not at heavyweight, and he says he doesn't really want to fight him at all at this point, but I guess we'll see what happens in this fight. On the other side of the UFC 230 main event, have you allowed yourself to wrap your brain around a world where Derrick Lewis is the UFC heavyweight champion?
Only today I started to do that, as we kind of saw them in the weigh-ins and then in the ceremonial weigh-ins, and I'm just writing a little bit about them, and you start to think these things through.
Yeah.
It would seem very UFC in its own way, because we've seen, like, Michael Bisping is the closest thing I can think of, the UFC 199, where he's basically given an opportunity out of left field, 2 weeks notice, goes in and wins it, and then just basically hijacks the belt for 17 months. He takes it on its own tour, and he fights guys that weren't really in the top 5, things like that. So yes, there's a little bit of that, but I will say that I think if Derrick Lewis wins it, there are obvious resolutions to the problem. Like, he's got fights. If you put him against Stipe Miocic right away, right? Like, you could do that fight and it would make complete sense. You could put him against Brock Lesnar. That would be a big fight. So I don't think there would be in the exact same boat, but it would certainly change a lot of things for Daniel Cormier, and it would change the makeup of that division. And, of course, Daniel Cormier would probably want to crack at that belt again, too. You always have that go back into play. So it would certainly change it. It would not shock me, though, at this point.
What a story that would be for Derrick Lewis. So we've been through all the jokes and all the fun and all the hijinks. They're going to fight now on Saturday night. They're going to get inside a cage, and it's going to get locked behind them. They're going to go at it.
Yeah.
How do you see this fight playing out now that it is here and we've been through it all?
I think that we've seen Derrick Lewis show his perseverance and his heart many times. It comes back, you can't leave him. He can always conserve just enough energy to knock you out in the end. We've seen him do this. I just think that Daniel Cormier is quick. I think he's going to hurt him, and he won't let him off the hook. That's really the way I see it. I think once he gets him hurt, some of these other guys let Derrick off the hook. I don't think Daniel will. I think he'll finish the fight. Probably, the way I see it going down is he hurts him with something and gets it to the ground and just finishes through ground and pound. I'll say like second roundish.
So that's your pick, official pick, second round TKO.
Yeah.
No submission, TKO.
Yeah, I think TKO.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's move on now to the co-main event. It's a very important middleweight fight, and this co-main event has shifted a lot over the last few weeks and months. It was originally supposed to be Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier. That was the original co-main event when it was set in August.
Yeah.
Then Poirier fell off. Then it was going to be Weidman versus Luke Rockhold. Then Luke Rockhold fell off. And just 2 weeks ago, Jacare Souza stepped in. He was supposed to fight David Branch on this card. Now he's fighting Chris Weidman in the co-main event. It's still a big middleweight fight.
Yeah.
It holds up well to the Weidman-Rockhold fight. We don't lose much because Jacare has been a perennial contender at middleweight for a very long time.
That's why. I think that people who've paid attention to this sport long enough, and especially going back into the Strikeforce days where Rockhold and Jacare were fighting, and Jacare has been he's been in that perennial top 5 spot forever, sometimes going as high as like number 1 contender, so I just feel like that guy he deserves any big fight he can get. He's persevered this long, so to me this was
and
a
he's
fight
had some opportunities kind of maybe not go his way, not through no fault of his own sometimes.
Right, and I think that this is a fight I wanted to see back in the day, and just given who these two guys are, neither one of them, I mean, maybe they're not exactly the best fighter where they were at their peak, but I think that they're certainly good enough right now where it still matters. They're still vital fighters, and they're coming at it and Weidman's hometown, which always adds that extra dimension. So I'm looking forward to that one quite a bit.
What do you make of Chris Weidman this week? Very loose, almost inspirational in the way he's been talking about. He had that losing streak. He was rock bottom. He came from being on top of the world, beating Anderson Silva. So he's kind of faced it all now in his UFC career, and now he's on the other side of it. He's
had a very strange career because I felt like he caught a lot of the hate for killing off an icon with Anderson Silva. He had to live that down. You remember? I think it was the Vitor Belfort fight. He kind of was very aggressive on the mic afterward, like, "No, do you believe me now?" And that turned some fans off. But you remember he kind of went through a rough
Joined
patch.
the team.
Yeah, and then he loses some fights. I felt like that hate got extinguished a little bit. Then you're just watching Chris Weidman again. Got back on track the last fight out.
Yeah.
He's still been injury prone, but. Having said all of that, just his ability to absorb and keep going and be in this spot, and I feel like he's enjoying it. He's taking it all in. He knows he's at Madison Square Garden. He probably sees the end coming, and I think he's just trying to get the most out of it, and it's really coming across, man. He's kind of like, it's almost like we're looking at a young Chris Weidman again, the guy who was doing all the crazy stuff and cutting all the weight to fight Damon Maia, and just a really eager guy that we saw coming up. He gives me that vibe again.
It seems like if Weidman wins this fight, he'll get the title shot. That seems like a given because he has the win already against Kelvin Gastelum, who is #1 contender.
Yep.
If Jacare wins this fight, he's on a losing streak right now. If he wins this fight, he'll only be on a 1-fight winning streak. Does he get the title shot, or do we have to do more, do you think, to get that shot?
I think he'll have to do more. And poor Jacare, too, man. I mean, even when he was winning multiple fights in a row and not losing, he still couldn't ascend that. And there was always timing issues and everything else. But I think this would be a huge feather in his cap, puts him right back in there. But I think he'd still have to do probably one more to get to that, especially in our new day and age, man. You know how it is with the new entertainment business that they're kind of running. Some of the meritocracy is no longer as, it's a little more obscure than it used to be. So I feel like he's probably looking at one more fight if he's able to do this impressively.
Your pick, Weidman versus Jacare.
I can't go against Chris Weidman in this situation, man. I just feel like you were mentioning, I feel like he's loose. He's probably I feel like he's dialed in, really. That's the way it feels to me. I'd be surprised if he goes out there and he looks anything but kind of like vintage Chris Weidman, really. I think he's going to go out there and get it done.
Okay, I'm gonna jump around now a little bit.
Okay.
We're gonna jump to the opener of the main card, which is a very important, also a middleweight fight between Israel Adesanya and Derrick Brunson. Now, Israel Adesanya is a guy that many believe is the next guy, so to speak, the next big star in the sport. Some believe. Yeah. Probably the toughest test for Israel Adesanya is Brunson not.
Yeah. Oh, what I like about him, it's Conor McGregor-esque, although Conor did have Dennis Seaver in kind of the middle of it. It kind of threw things off. But I feel like he has that escalation thing.
Yes.
One guy to the next. There's an escalation in competition. Perfectly matched against Derrick Brunson, a guy who comes out and he headhunts right away, likes to throw bombs. You want to see him in this situation. A big time event, kicking off the main card at Madison Square Garden. Now, you want to see how he does it. This is part of his escalation. This is part to see how much of that it factor will translate in a big moment. This is his showcase. He said it. He worded it just like that. This is his showcase moment, and that out of everything, every individual story going on, I think his has the most compelling nature to it. Yeah.
Is it possible that on Sunday we're talking about Adesanya more than anyone else from this card?
I think that this is one of those cards where he could steal the show, and we're sitting here talking about middleweights and everything else. He may slide into that conversation if he gets a really good performance, and for some reason he just looks that much bigger and he's ready for the moment. We know that Dana White loves him. We know that the UFC loves him. I think that a lot of people look at him as the next cash cow as well, and you'd have to consider all of that. Here's a big business guy now coming up, and he's realizing his moment. So he could seriously put himself right up there at the top if he does this.
I do want to ask you that because Adesanya told me at Media Day on Thursday that he feels like if he wins Saturday, if he wins spectacularly, he should be the next guy. He wants to fight Robert Whittaker in New Zealand. They're both from New Zealand. Is it too soon though? Because that would be a major step up from Brunson. No offense to Brunson, but it would be a major.
Well,
step.
we're sitting here talking about his natural escalation in these events and stuff. That would be like sending him straight to the top. I would like to see him obviously face a top 5 guy before he'd get that. I feel like there'd be a lot of disgruntled middleweights, kind of who feel like they're above him at this point. But like I said, man, we've had this discussion on the beat this week as well. It's so blurry these days as to figure out what a contender is versus a remarkable guy who might jump up in front of those guys and stuff like that. So I could see a situation where they might accelerate him to that if they really believed that he's the guy. But I don't think so. I think he would have to fight probably the next guy. There would be somebody in between.
Can Brunson make himself relevant again in the division on Saturday with the win over Adesanya, a guy that people are kind of pushing up to the top already? Can he do that? Can he put himself on that list?
Such a tough ask because you're asking him to go in there and not just beat a guy who's really good, but to kill off the icon, the up-and-comer that everybody's rooting to see succeed. Yeah. So it's one of these weird situations. These guys who are casting these roles, I don't envy him because if he goes in there and just smashes Adesanya, well, he just crushed a myth that people wanted to pin some hopes around. So yes, it would do him it would do him wonders to do that. But I feel like there'd be some hard feelings too, which is it's a complicated situation.
And Brunson did tell me on media day that he was pissed at himself about where he actually is right now in the divisions. He feels like he should be higher up and kind of controlling his own fate, so to speak.
Yeah.
Real quick, your pick, Adesanya, Brunson.
I'm going to go with Adesanya, and I think he's going to get it done with a finish this time.
Okay.
I know his last couple, he gets very upset with himself when he doesn't finish these fights, but I think he's fighting an accommodating partner. I think that Brunson will headhunt him a little bit. I think there'll be that exchange, and I can envision Adesanya. He's a very rangy guy, just kind of strafing him from distance and getting something going and hurting him and finishing that fight. I don't know which round, but I could easily see Adesanya finishing this one.
Okay, I'm going to jump now again to the FS1 prelims, a women's flyweight. Well, I guess it's a catchweight fight now between Sijara Eubanks, who missed weight on Friday morning. Yeah. She's fighting Roxanne Modafferi. Now, this is a notable story, Chuck, because Sijara Eubanks at one point was going to be the main event of this card. Yeah. She was going to fight Valentina Shevchenko for the women's flyweight title. That did not end up happening, of course. Derrick Lewis
very glad of that now, right?
Daniel Cormier came in. Eubanks misses weight. It would have been a disaster had she gotten the title shot and missed weight for the title fight. And now it seems like even if she beats Modafferi, those title hopes could be dashed. Yeah. This is her second time having weight issues. What do you make of all this? Because Eubanks has been a focal point. She's been a big part of the storyline about this card because she had beef with Dana White, Joe Rogan. Now she misses weight. Where does she go from here?
Well, like you mentioned, I think a lot of eyes were on her just because she was been in the headlines for this whole card. She is literally getting as much attention, I think, as some of the biggest fighters on this card. So this was a big moment for her.
She got booed at the weigh-ins.
She got booed. People care. They're paying attention to her. I feel like this was her moment to really shine. So it's very, very unfortunate and disappointing, I think, that she did not make the weight.
She could have turned it around.
She could have.
She could have.
And I love her attitude. Honestly, I love that she is who she is. I love that she doesn't take any shit from anybody. I think that she's just she's got the right attitude. It's just, unfortunately, man, that it seems like this is going to plague her. And I don't know. I can tell you right now, the UFC has got it. They can't be too happy about this, and I'm sure they're not very eager, even if she has a great showing, to just thrust her into a title shot in the next one. It just adds a dimension of fear and skepticism to the whole thing.
What is your pick in that fight, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with Eubanks. I think she'll get it done.
Okay.
But I think Modafferi
kind of a lame duck win because
Modafferi is tough. It'll go the distance, but I'm going to take Eubanks.
Okay, they're kicking us out of the MSG Theater. Now we're going to wrap it up here. For Chuck, I'm Marc. Stay tuned to MMAfighting.com for all your pre- and post-fight coverage of UFC 230 from New York.